You're a trooper. Thank you.
Not at all. I'm well versed in tech challenges. It's a whole new world. It's a new ball game. For those watching, if we happen to be live, and we're not sure you can hear us. Hopefully, this isn't.
I know. We apologize to the audience for any technical glitches, and we're working it through. Please be patient. I know Faith and Tom are in the background.
Working hard. And as I think we're back on, Shirley.
Okay, wonderful. So, Marco, I am sorry about the technical difficulties. This comes with this new virtual reality and hosting a summit live. So clearly this is live. And I know you were sharing some words of wisdom and your experience at Yale University and with your colleagues.
You have leadership that might have grown up either in close proximity to, if not experiencing some of the same challenges. That leadership is going to have better understanding, better nuance, better insight into the challenges and needs of that community, right? Similarly, that community may have a greater comfort level. They may be more responsive. They may be more proactive in reaching out to an organization when they know there are people there who their gut instinct tells them might understand them better. Right. And so having leadership that reflects the community and the population served is also another reason why it's good to have a more diverse leadership representation. And finally, what I say to folks is even if those two reasons for some reason is not convincing enough, the third, which again gets fairly proven when you do exercises and activities about it, is the more diverse, and here it becomes not just a racial, ethnic diversity question, but just in general, the more diverse a team you have, the more creativity you have at the table, the more differences there are among the set of people trying to make decisions and come up with solutions, the more those solutions are going to be innovative, and there are going to be more people thinking outside of the box. There's going to be people who tackle problems different ways. There are going to be people who come up with new solutions that maybe a group of people who all had the same background might have never occurred to them because it just simply didn't occur to them, right? And so there's that added benefit of greater creativity, greater originality, greater innovation when you have those diverse groups. And so for all those reasons, in my mind, it's important that folks take an honest, and that's, again, like I said, it's important that folks take an honest look at who their leadership is. That was the second half of your question. I'll answer that kind of quickly. What can we do about it? So that is, organizations can take an honest look at how it is they're recruiting and how it is they're retaining their leadership, right? When you get to leadership levels in the nonprofit world, a lot of the time, I find at least, is often word of mouth, personal networks. Well, if your personal network is actually not that diverse, it's pretty homogenous. If it's people from your town or your neighborhood, more importantly in your town, people who went to your college, people who worked at the same job that you worked at, it may not be a very diverse group, in which case you're not casting a wide enough net to get new applicants in the door. Similarly, there may be factors that are unconscious and unintentional, but that are creating barriers to different applicants. So for example, it's pretty customary still to this day that highly high-level, senior-level positions, job descriptions are advertised saying that we require a master's degree, preferably, or 10 years of experience, et cetera. Again, I would argue that it's pretty common that you find that master's degree alone is actually not what makes a good candidate. There's plenty of candidates who get jobs with master's degree who don't necessarily work out, right? And so really, for folks to rejigger their job applications to think about what is it you're actually looking for. Are you looking for a set of skills, and might those skills have been acquired in another way than a master's degree program, right? are there experiences people have that might even be experiences you're not familiar with? That could be different. Similarly, when you look at resumes, the more, and I say this as a person who graduated from Yale, so I realize I benefit from the privilege, but people look at resumes, and the more selective the college, the more fancy the name of the college is, the stronger automatically, and so sometimes subconsciously, people think that applicant is, without giving benefit to the fact that a person may have busted their butt and been first in their class at the local state college. They might have gone to CUNY. That doesn't mean that they're not as competitive, and that, more importantly, that they might not actually be a better candidate for your job than someone who went to an Ivy League school, et cetera, right? And so there's decisions like that if you stop and think about how are we looking for candidates, where are we looking for candidates, and how are we deciding who our top candidate is, that you're going to find that there may be differences and changes you can make that are subtle ones that you never realize we're creating a pool, or we're creating bias in favor of certain applicants over others. Again, even if you by no means meant that to be the result.
That's wonderful, and I think so. The last question is in terms of recruitment and engaging and bringing in a team. It isn't customary for people of color, Latino or Black college graduates to automatically gravitate towards the nonprofit industry. Can you tell us why that's a challenge, and what can we as nonprofit organizations do to better recruit more employees who represent communities of color?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So, I mean, I would say there's a couple of factors to that I'll mention quickly. So one is, I think we as a sector haven't traditionally operated in a parallel way to, for example, the private sector. So, and what I mean by that, for example, is that we don't have a tradition of like recruiting on college campuses at expos. We have individual organizations who may go out and do that, but it's not something that we do as an overall industry, as a sector. And I think there could be benefit where organizations and associations, et cetera, could partner up and find ways to help promote and recruit and engage potential job applicants at job fairs and expos, et cetera. And again, on college campus recruiting to help bring folks in. Another reason and component to that, whether it's the advertising or public service announcements or whatever, is helping people understand the nonprofit sector. I can't tell you, I certainly believe this, and I think I realized, I thought this mistakenly when I was in college, and I find people to this day who think the nonprofit sector, people's often interaction when they're not in the field is as a volunteer. And as a result, people end up with the total mistaken impression that the nonprofit sector is just for volunteering, and or that the people who do work with volunteers must either be volunteers themselves or very, very low paid or part-time. And so people don't realize that there's an actual fulfilling career in the nonprofit sector. They don't understand that there are jobs, not just doing the services and the programs, but in fact, I argue to people, I say, the nonprofit sector is a fully comprehensive, robust sector. It actually needs graphic designers. It needs architects, artists. It needs accountants, right? It needs lawyers.
Yes.
It needs comms.
Yes.
Like, it needs everything, not just people who know how to run the soup kitchen or the job training or the workshop presentation, but everything. It needs maintenance folks, right? All the schools and nonprofit after school programs need bus drivers, right? All of the jobs are available in the nonprofit world, and people don't think that or realize that or look to it for jobs. And then the last piece is low income, first generation kids of color often have greater financial obligations than many of their peers. And I think that creates a reluctance because there's still this sense that the nonprofit sector, and sadly, I mean, in many ways, it's not completely untrue, which is that you certainly can't get wealthy in the nonprofit sector unless you're doing something wrong, right? But you can provide for your family. The reality is the misconception that you can provide for your family in the nonprofit sector. And so people, particularly students who have big student loans, who are sending money to their parents and helping support their parents' rent, right? Or who are supporting siblings, et cetera, financially. They think that the nonprofit sector, there's just no way they're ever going to make enough of a living wage to be able to pay all those bills and have anything resembling a life that's not full of stress and debt, right? And so there again, I think helping educate people, obviously, making sure we have good competitive wages is important, right? And that goes on both the nonprofit side in terms of wages we pay, and on the philanthropy side in terms of how we fund and what we choose is to fund, for example, the personnel line item in a grant proposal. But making sure to do that, as well as helping people know, again, that working for the nonprofit sector does not automatically mean a vow of poverty. And you'd find, again, I find that folks who are not, who don't have extensive experience with the nonprofit world just have no idea. Because again, we're not as well marketed as many other places.
That's absolutely right. And I think that those of us who are participating in this summit and that are looking to increase diversity and do
Thank you both. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Marco, for bearing with us. And of course, for this amazing discussion. We really appreciate it. We did.
Like when you think about same thing in the workplace, right? Simply saying to folks, we're going to provide a transportation stipend to all our employees, right? We're going to give them subway tokens in the city, right? And some equivalent transportation. That's great. Some folks, however, live much, much further away than others, right? And so simply providing the exact same amount, again, is equal, is fair by some measure, but again, is not equitable, doesn't provide equity, right? And simply saying to folks, everybody's going to have a chance to do that. But if folks live much farther away and have a childcare challenge, right? So that public transportation isn't an option when they have to sort of do school drop-offs and so on. And again, some folks have their own car and can do it and can accommodate it, no problem. Some folks might need a little bit of extra help. If you really want to give all of your employees a chance to be able to contribute equally at the organization, then you might want to treat the supports you provide to your employees with an equity lens in terms of really adapting to the different situations that folks have, such that, again, in many ways, by some arguments, that's actually a more fair distribution of the resources. Sorry, but go ahead. You were going to ask a question.
No, absolutely. So you were also a partner at New Profit, a national nonprofit venture philanthropy, where you led efforts on capitalizing diverse leaders and organizations. I want to shift the conversation specifically to development of leadership, nonprofits, and learn a little bit more about your work there, creating more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the social sector. And why is it important for the social sector to support this?
Yeah, so the work I did, I think, again, has a lot of probably useful significance for folks at this summit. What we discovered, so part of the idea was trying to figure out, and as always the case, it was the result of the organization recognizing that, and by the way, New Profit is a what's known as a venture philanthropy. So it's a nonprofit organization itself, but it provided funding to other nonprofits to help them grow and expand and become that much more impactful, right? And so one of the things that started was that a simple review and a critique, frankly, from some of their audience that found that there was not a lot of diversity among their grantees. And so they started to sort of unpack that and try and figure out, why don't we have a very diverse grantee pool? And then they sort of took a step further and realized we don't have a very diverse applicant pool. And why is that? Well, maybe it's because they're not aware of us, or maybe every student gets a laptop. What isn't factored in is that some students probably already have a laptop, and some students might not have good internet access, right? So if you folks in those communities who are hard, as you mentioned, are often seriously economically vulnerable in ways that are again completely beyond their control, that are much more stark and dire, I think, than people realize, right? And so, food banks have been getting to empty, to bare shelves, right? Food banks have been running out of food because there's so much need. And I think supporting and contributing to those organizations is one. I think helping connect the dots is two, right? The Latinx and BIPOC families often, particularly whether it be out of pride and embarrassment, but because of the need, or just because of exposure and interaction in the past, may not be aware of where the supports are, right? Where the organizations, where the programs are. And to the extent that anybody can be a bridge, that anybody can help direct people to where they the support they need, to the organizations that provide that kind of support, I think is critical, number two. And then finally, from a healthcare standpoint, I think, again, sort of any ways in which we can support, whether with resources or just in emotionally, the frontline workers, right, the responders, the health workers, the delivery folks, the stock folks, stocking shelves at grocery stores, et cetera, helping those folks out, again, who are putting themselves at risk, who are often doing stuff. I mean, I think the personal protective equipment challenges have probably diminished. I know early at the stage that was a thing where people were being at risk and were not being provided the gloves and the masks and the things that they needed in order to be able to do this work. It's risky. I think that's gotten better, but I think keeping an eye on that and making sure, right? Because in many ways, again, that's not always everybody else's priority. People, again, this is the kind of situation where people are most worried about themselves, understandably, right? Because everybody is at risk, as we've seen. But again, remembering to think of other folks and being helpful wherever possible, I think is another way to think about it. And again, realizing that some of these folks are not able to, or are not accessing the outlets to be able to advocate for themselves, to point out that they're at risk, to point out that they're at need, or to point out that the conditions they're in need some improvement.
Thank you, Marco. And one final question before we'll wrap it up. You pointed out before that there's a disproportionate number of BIPOC and Latinx individuals in leadership positions in nonprofit organizations. And something that certainly our keynote speaker tomorrow, Sean Thomas Breitfeld, is going to talk about, co-author of the Race to Lead survey. So is there, can you expand a little bit about on that, and whether you've seen, although it doesn't seem like it, has there been any progress as it relates to youth going into public policy or the nonprofit spheres?
I'll give a couple of answers to that. And yeah, Sean really has the data. So, I mean, you're going to actually hear much better and more comprehensive response on this from a macro level tomorrow. What I will say about it is, sadly, a little bit of a preview of to what he's going to share. Sadly, there has not been enough progress, and arguably in some ways not any progress, in terms of the representation numbers. The numbers have been sadly pretty stagnant, and in some ways it's even more alarming. And even if they've ticked up a little bit, when you compare to the growth of the population, like, it has not kept up. It's been really alarming, if you will, in that, again, that we're nowhere near on a path to closing that gap anytime soon, at least in terms of historical trends thus far, right? We may turn a corner now in some ways after this year, because again, there's been so much more awareness of social justice and needs that I think people are recommitting in different ways than they ever have before. Where there has been progress is in awareness of the issue, right? Because it used to be that people said it, but there was no data to back it. You couldn't prove it. You just sort of looked around and sort of, leaders of color like myself and Shirley and others would simply be like, I go to these meetings, I go to these events, and there's nobody else in these things who look like me. And people would be like, that's unfortunate, but maybe there's someone somewhere else, right? Whereas now the data is like, no, really, like, there are too few folks. And so that, again, as a friend and mentor once said, who was a mathematician, he sort of said, in math, in order to solve a problem, you have to define the problem first, right? That's sort of one of the rules of math and algebra, et cetera. And it's a good sort of lesson for life. So I think, again, where we've made progress is that we've begun to get more clarity and precision on the problem, right? We're able to say, not only do we not have enough representation, in fact, it's underrepresented by X amount in X ways in X places, and therefore that's where the pain points are, and we can then start to hopefully have efforts. And that's something that's fairly recent. That's the last few years. The Race to Lead project is, I think, 1, maybe 2 years old, if memory serves. I could be wrong, but I think, or at least this initiative on the data, right? So all of this is fairly new information that people now can act on. And again, I feel like the progress is that there is a will to address it. There is an interest in it. It's not people saying folks are unfairly complaining or wanting extra, preferential treatment. It's actually recognizing there is a problem because there is a gap, and this gap just continues and continues. So clearly, whether or not it's intentional, it's something that is not changing. The last piece to your point about encouraging young people to go into the nonprofit sector and public policy, the interesting thing is, I would argue in many ways the nonprofit sector has the potential again, I haven't seen data on this yet, but certainly in terms of conversation I see and hear among the young people we work with and others, is there is an interest in change, right? The young people, I think, similarly, really see the challenges that our society is facing and seem to be, the millennial generation and Gen Z, I feel like are deeply, deeply interested and committed in change. If anything, ironically, I find that we have some challenges persuading people to come to Washington, D.C., because they sort of say Washington is a mess. We don't want to go deal with Congress. They don't seem to do anything. They say we want to go to the streets, right? We want to go work on the ground, grassroots organizations. We want to be a part of folks engaging with real people every day. And in my mind, again, that's needed at that point is to sort of, for nonprofits to sort of say, we've got jobs for you to do this full time, right? Because I would argue nonprofits are trying to change the status quo. Nonprofits are trying to make the lives of those most in need better. And you've got this like tremendous army of people with the energy and the desire to make that change. And so I think that's something that's promising that may, again, help boost the ranks of the nonprofit sector and put people at a minimum on the path to leadership, if not moving into leadership very quickly.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marco, for being a part of this today. Shirley, thank you for leading this discussion and, of course, being a part of our steering committee. We can't thank you both enough for being a part of this. So that concludes today's day one of our Nonprofit Leadership Summit. I want to thank our steering committee, our sponsors, and of course, all of you for joining us today. We truly hope that you found value in today's presentation in between some of our technical issues, and we hope that you'll be here tomorrow. As I said, Sean Thomas Breitfeld, a co-director of the Building Movement Project and co-author of the Race to Lead report, will talk about the nonprofit racial leadership gap, which we all know about. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day and stay safe.
Imagine a city that runs on clean electricity.
A city that's powered by sun, wind,
and energy from the earth.
Con Edison is committed to turning that dream
into reality.
Making clean energy more accessible for everyone.
From South Brooklyn
to North Westchester,
Con Edison is helping build a future where there's clean energy for all.
Now and for generations to come.